special teacher? Raise your hands. Wow, most everyone has a special teacher. Wow, wow, wow. So, who's your special teacher? Emily. And who has a special teacher? Back there, who's your special teacher?
Oh, from high school, my history teacher.
History teacher.
And my math teacher.
Math teacher, goodness sakes. Anyone else have another? Yes?
My
Spanish
Spanish teacher is
teacher.
my favorite teacher is my old teacher, James, and my teacher.
Wow. How about your rabbi? No, that's not working.
That's a given.
Well, it's a given. So, everyone, ladies and gentlemen, and children of all ages, I want to introduce you to one of my teachers. Even rabbis have teachers. And this is a very special teacher because she has taught people all over the world. And she teaches by being a master storyteller. How many of you love stories? Wow, we all love stories. And we're in for a great treat because no matter how old we are, we're all children. People think that stories are just for children. But the truth is, we're all children. And we all love stories. Little children and big children. So I want to introduce you to really my teacher and my Rebbe in so many ways, who's taught me so much, and amongst the many things that she has taught me is the power of stories, how stories can really shape and teach. So this is the master storyteller in the world today, Peninnah Schram. Let everyone give a big round of applause.
Avi, you just took my introduction to you. Because where did I learn stories? Well, from my mama, my papa, but it's Rav Avi's inspiration and the way he tells. I watch him, I listen to him, I drink in the neshama of the love of story and how you spread that love as you just stand in front of people, as you look at them, as you speak to them. And I owe you a thank you and a heart full of gratitude. And so publicly I want to say thank you for the story that I'm about to tell, because it's a long story, but I remember that morning very well when I asked Rav Avi to teach a Midrash workshop. And he just turned to me and he said, bring up the Chumashim and an apple and a knife. I said, okay. Not understanding what he needed an apple and a knife for. I never questioned him. And it is because of that story that so many other stories have gone out into the world. So I'm going to wait for this stand. I can use both my hands. And meanwhile, I happen to have an apple and a knife.
We have to give a big hand to Brian.
Yes. A little bit lower. I'm not as tall as Rav Avi. That's good. That's good. Thank you so much. And this is a story about an apple. And I need your help in telling the story. It's my way of telling this story, and I would love to hear Rav Avi's version someday again, maybe later. But I need your help in telling the story. And I dedicate the story to the children who are here and to the child in each of us that we must keep alive. A long time ago, there was a great oak forest. Can you all be oak trees? And in that forest, those trees grew tall and majestic, reaching right up into the sky. And in that same forest, there was a little apple tree. And the apple tree shivered through the cold winter months as the snow lay on its branches. But every night, Every night the little apple tree looked up at those millions of stars and called out, God! Oh, God! I'd like to have stars hanging in my tree on my branches, just like those oak trees have. Because to the apple tree it seemed as if those stars were hanging in those branches of the oak trees. And God looked down at that little apple tree and said, have patience, patience, patience. And time passed. Can you do this? And time passed, and the seasons changed, and now it was, after winter comes, oh yes, and in the spring the apple tree grew little tiny green leaves and blossoms, but still you know what happened, night after night. The little apple tree looked up at those millions and millions and millions and millions and millions and millions. Millions and millions of stars and called out, God, God, I want more than anything in the world to have stars in my tree, in my blossoms. And God looked down at that little apple tree and said, isn't it enough that you have wonderful shade to offer people? And fragrant blossoms, isn't that enough? And the tree answered,
No.
time passed. Everybody. Time passed and the seasons changed, and now it was
Spring.
summer. You see, spring is the right answer for another question. And in the summer, the apple tree grew little tiny green apples, and the seasons changed once more, and now it was fall. And the fall, the apple tree was filled with apples, but still you know what happened night after night. The little apple tree looked up at those millions of stars and called out, God, I want more than anything in the world to have stars in my tree, in my apples. And God caused a wind to blow. Can I hear? And the wind blew and the tree swayed. Everybody, come on, keep the wind going. Come on, trees, sway. And the apple tree shook. And as the apple tree shook, keep the wind going. I need a wind tunnel. Keep going. And the apple tree shook and the apples fell to the ground. It's a long way down. And when they fell, the apple tree saw that it had stars inside of it all along. They just never knew it. But that's not the end of the story. Can you all see the stars? Do a little show and tell later. We Jews love apples. Just a few months ago at Rosh Hashanah, we cut apples into slices, dip them into honey, and wish each other a sweet year. And then at Hanukkah, what do you eat with your latkes? Applesauce, sour cream. Oh, there's a comedian every time. Maybe in Australia. And now, just in a couple of weeks, it's going to be Pesach. And even some of the Sephardim, but certainly the Ashkenazim, when we make harosis, what do we use? And how do you cut your apples? Probably, well, some of you are too young to cut the apples maybe, but those of you who are old enough, and like everybody in the world, you take the apple with the core up and you cut it down into slices, right? But if you change your direction just a little bit, and if you change your direction just a little bit, and if you change your direction just a little bit, you too will find the spark that ignites the star inside of you. And what each of us has inside of us are our stories. We have our name stories. How many of you know who you were named after and why that name and the spelling, going back all the way to the original person who may have carried that name? We have our personal stories. We have our family stories. We have our sacred stories of Torah. And we have our traditional folk tales. And it's built into our Jewish calendar to sit around the table and exchange stories. And when we share our stories, we spark an even brighter star and bring more light and shalom to our world. And now my beloved teacher, my inspiration, Rav Avi Weiss.
So, I want to tell you a story that happened not so long ago. How many of you are 3 years old? Raise your hand. And 4, and 2, and 1, and 5, and 6. Well, this happened when I was a little boy. Could you imagine your rabbi a little boy? Who can imagine that? Raise your hand. Everyone can imagine that. So when I was a little boy, my mommy, may she rest in peace, she always would ask me in a loving way, always in a loving way, to do different things in the house. How many of you have been asked to do different things in the house for your mommies and daddies? Well, my mommy would ask me to do things like, do you know what they used to call me when I was little? Not Avi, they called me Avrumi. Avrumi, you have to take the garbage out. How many of you take the garbage out? Any of you? Well, I had to take the garbage out. And and all kinds of different things. Like, for example, my mommy always would make sure that she insisted I actually make up my room, that my room was clean. That was very difficult for a young yeshiva boy to make sure that his room was clean. I didn't even know how to spell the word clean, but we had to get our room clean. And then I would go to school from morning to night, and I'd come home and I would say, Ima, Abba, there's so much homework. It's too much for me. It's too much. Too much math, too much chumash. It's much, much, too much. I really, really can't handle it. And when I got a little older, my father used to wake me up every morning. Do you know why? He insisted that I go to synagogue every morning. Sometimes I wouldn't want to wake up. You know what he would do? He would actually tickle my feet. Could you imagine? Ooh. He insisted that I go to shul every morning. And one day, I turned to my mom and to my dad and I said, all of this is so difficult. I've got to clean my room. I've got to take out the garbage too often. There's too much homework. And going to tefillah, going to services every day, it's too much. How many of you think it's too much? Raise your hands. It is a lot. So I want to tell you what happened. But you've got to really listen closely and open your ears. This is a beautiful story. My mommy and my dad, who is actually now sitting shiva for his wife, so we hope that Abba is doing well. Abba and Ima told me this story. And here's the story. Are you ready, Peninnah?
Oh, yes.
Once upon a time, a long time ago, before there was even time, could you imagine? It was so long ago, it was even before there was time. God created the world. And when God created the world, God said, let there be heaven, let there be earth. And as God created the world, God said, I want to create birds. How many of you love birds? I love birds. But here's the thing, everyone, you're not going to believe this. According to this legend, When God created the birds in the beginning, are you ready? The birds had no wings. Could you imagine? They had no wings. They couldn't fly. And the birds came to God and said, Hashem, God, they started crying. And God said, why are you crying, my birds? You know I love you. And the birds said, we're so little. And we live in a world where there are tigers and leopards and giraffes and elephants. We're so small. And it is true, being so small, that we're very, very quick, we're fast. But we're so small that we're afraid that we're going to be devoured. We're going to be eaten up by the bigger animals. So God turned to the birds and said, have patience. You'll see, you'll see. And according to this midrash, according to this legend, everyone look here for a second. After a few days, God was thinking, what should I do about this? The birds are, everybody go, the birds are so small, and the bigger animals can devour the birds. Do you know what God did? God turned to the birds and said, I am going to create for you wings, pinions, wings, and that'll solve the problem. You'll have wings. So God looks at the birds and he says, I command that the birds have wings. And suddenly there were these beautiful wings that came on the birds. And guess what? The birds started to cry more and more. And God said, why are you crying? I just gave you wings. And the bird said, I'll tell you, God, when we were little, so we were smaller than the tigers and the lions and the leopards, but we were very quick. We could run very quickly. We could get away. But now, you created these things on our sides, and they're weighing us down. They're weighing us down. We can't move. We feel like we have so much weight on our back, we no longer could run. And God turned to the birds and said, but I created wings for you. And the birds said, but these things on our side, what do you mean wings? They feel like they're very, very weighty, and they're weighing us down. It's worse now than ever. And then God got it, because he realized that these things were weighing them down. And according to the Midrash, God takes the bird and lifts the bird in his hands, could you imagine? And turns to the birds and say, you know, I love you so much. I've created for you these things on your side. You think that they're weights to weigh you down. But you know what they are? They're wings. They're wings. And if you'll flap your wings, and I'll teach you how to do that, you're going to be able to fly. And the bird said, really? I'll be able to fly? And God said, really? And the birds began to flap their wings, and they fluttered, and suddenly they began to fly, and then they soared. And then the birds turned to God and said, you know, God, you taught me a big lesson. We thought these things on our side weighed us down. We didn't realize that what do? They lift us up, and they allow us to soar. And so my father and my mother said to me the following, I know we ask you to do homework. Boom. I know that we ask you to clean your room. I know that we ask you to do this and to do that. Now you may think it weighs you down. But looking back on it, you know what it did? it helped me learn to fly. And to all of the big children in the room, sometimes we face all kinds of challenges, and we think, and indeed those challenges could be very, very weighty. But the very challenge that is weighty could really be the key that teaches us and allows us to soar higher and higher. Peninnah.
We could do a whole program of bird stories. The stories that I tell usually come from the Israel Folktale Archives. And that's an archive founded in 1955 by the great folklorist Dov Noy. Through the help of volunteers, they have now gathered over 24,000 folk tales from the various ethnic communities in Israel. The story I want to tell you has been found amongst the Jewish communities in both the Middle East, amongst the Sephardim, in Iraq, in Iran, and Yemen, and in Eastern Europe amongst the Ashkenazim, one of the most popular folk tales. And I need your help in telling this story. A long time ago, there were three brothers who loved adventure. How many of you love adventure? Yeah. So these three brothers decided to go on a journey, each one to a different part of the world. And after 10 years, they would return, bringing with each of them an unusual gift. And so the oldest brother traveled east, and he searched for what would be unusual. He came into a marketplace, and there were entertainments of all kinds. What kind of entertainments? Name it. Call it out. Yes, and jugglers, and music, musicians, and dancers, and singers. Yes, and magicians, and fire eaters. And one magician had a magic glass through which he could see to all parts of the world. Now the oldest brother wanted that magic glass. He offered a great deal of money, and finally, reluctant though he was, this magician sold the magic glass to the oldest brother, and the oldest brother decided that would be the unusual gift he would bring back when it was time to meet his brothers. Now the second brother traveled west. Am I going west? This way? And he searched for what would be unusual. He kept his eyes open and his mind as well. And he entered one of those marketplaces like a shuk. And there were merchants of every kind. What were they selling? Carpets and, beautiful carpets here. And gold and food and glass and yes, and spices and silks. And one merchant called him over and said, "Come and buy my beautiful carpets." He came closer, and there was a pile of carpets. Oh, and they were beautiful indeed. But at the very bottom, the carpet began to move as if by itself. What sort of carpet is this that moves by itself? And the merchant motioned him closer and said to the second brother, "Buy this carpet, for it is a flying carpet. It can fly wherever you want to go in just a matter of minutes." And so after some bargaining, because it was a shuk, the second brother bought that magic carpet and decided that would be the unusual gift he would bring back when it was time to meet his brothers. Now the youngest brother traveled south, and he came to a place known for its forests. And he entered the woods, and there were trees of every kind, but one tree that was different than all the others. It was a pomegranate tree. How many of you know what a pomegranate is? Yes. How many of you have eaten a pomegranate on Rosh Hashanah or Sukkot? Yes. Nowadays you can buy pomegranates all year round. But how many little juicy kernels of a pomegranate are there?
Hundreds.
Hundreds.
40.
613, yes, and I've counted them, and it is true. The youngest brother saw this pomegranate tree, but what was very unusual was that there were hundreds of blossoms on the tree, but only one pomegranate hanging from the branch. He reached out his hand to pluck that pomegranate, but the pomegranate fell into his palm, and another one instantly burst from a blossom. He looked back at the tree had vanished. And the youngest brother looked at this beautiful pomegranate with the beautiful petals on the top of the design of the King Solomon's crown. And he said, there is some mystery about this pomegranate, but what sort of magic it contains I do not yet know, but I'll bring it back when it's time to meet my brothers. 10 years passed, and the three brothers met. And you can imagine how happy they were to see each other. And the oldest brother said, let me look through my magic glass and see what I can see. And as he looked, he saw in a distant kingdom a princess lying ill, near death. Come, my brother, said the second brother, we can fly on my magic carpet and be in that far-off kingdom in just a few minutes. And so they flew to that distant kingdom, and when they arrived, they found the king was grieving for his only daughter, for no doctor had been able to cure her of this mysterious illness. And in his grief, the king said, whoever saves my daughter will marry her and have half the kingdom beside. As if in a dream, the youngest brother heard a voice and said, and he stepped before the king and he said, let me try to save your daughter. And the king brought the youngest brother to where the princess was lying in her bed. And he sat next to her and he cut open that pomegranate. And he cut out those juicy kernels of the pomegranate and fed them to the princess one by one by one. And in just a few moments, the princess felt strong again, and she stood up from the bed, and she was fully restored to health. The king was overjoyed to see his daughter healthy and well, and he turned to the three brothers and said, whoever saved my daughter will marry her. Well, the three brothers began to argue as to which one deserved to marry the princess. If it were not for my magic glass, said the oldest brother, we could never have seen that the princess was ill in the first place. I deserve to marry her. No, said the second brother, if it were not for the magic carpet, we could never have arrived in time, and the princess would have died. I deserve to marry her. No, said the third brother, if it were not for the magic pomegranate, we could not have cured the princess. I deserve to be her husband. Now, since the three brothers could not decide who should marry the princess, the king tried to decide. He looked at those three handsome, resourceful young men, and he could not decide. And so he turned to his daughter, the princess, and said, my daughter, you are known for your great beauty, but also for your chokhmah, your wisdom. Tell me, my daughter, who do you think deserves to marry you? And if you know the story, do not answer. So if you were that wise princess, who would you choose? And you can be over 12 to answer. Who do you think? Yes.
The big brother.
You think the oldest brother because he saw her first, right? He initiated that whole process. Are you the oldest in your family? Yes. You see, we tell the stories of our lives. Yes. Who else? And of course, when children are in the room, adults somehow are afraid to be wrong. Who do you think? Did I see a hand? Yes. Who do you think? I don't think I'm going to get over here. No. Who do you think? Who, Mama? The little one, the youngest one. And why? Because you're the little one. Yeah. And of course, the reason behind the answer is always more important than the answer. So, who do you think?
The second one.
You like to travel. Why do you think the second brother?
And the second oldest.
Isn't that amazing? And of course, because he got them there in time, right? Yeah. Who do you think?
The biggest little.
And why?
Because he made Princess feel better.
Oh, that's the youngest. The oldest, the biggest brother, saw the princess. Yeah? You think the youngest because he cured her? He healed her? He gave her the little juicy pomegranate seeds? Beautiful. Can I hear from some of the adults? Yeah. We're all children.
I think she chooses none of them because she has the ability to go see the future. She could also travel with the middle one, and the youngest one would bring her the magic fruit. So she would be with all three as to go off and leave the kingdom and travel and see the rest of the world.
But not marry any of them.
Not marry any of them.
Why not marry all of them?
Depending on the
Bobby, do we have a... Wonderful. All right, so and there would be Schram, right?
But also she wanted to have her own choice. Like her father would be handing her off without her choice. So it's sort of like, you save my daughter, take her as a prize, but yet she'd like to have her own choice of her own partner.
Free to be you and me, right? Beautiful. Any other answers? Any other choices? Yes, who do you think?
The youngest brother.
Why the youngest?
Because he cured the princess.
Because he cured the princess. Okay. Well, I think because of time, who do you think?
Oh, I was going to say the oldest.
Why the oldest?
Well, because he kind of brought the whole thing up.
He brought the whole thing by having that vision through. Whoa. Oh, I'm going to tell you another story, okay? What's the answer? You just had about 8 answers. It's not enough for you? Oh, you mean you want to know the answer the way it is in the folklore tradition? The way it is in my version in Jewish Stories One Generation Tells Another, and the way it is in the version of the book that PJ Library sends out. Is that the ending you would like?
Yeah.
In the folktale tradition, in the several dozen versions in the Israel Folktale Archives, that version? That ending?
That ending.
Ah, okay. 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 So you want to tell now? And then I'm going to tell the ending after. Oh. Well, the princess looked at the 3 brothers and said, I must ask each of you a question. You see, a question is more important, right, than just the answers. She turned to the oldest brother and asked, has your gift changed in any way since you arrived in this kingdom? And the oldest brother answered, no, my magic glass is whole. I can see to all parts of the world. She asked that same question of the second brother. What's the question? Has your gift changed in any way since you arrived in this kingdom? The second brother answered,
No.
no, my magic carpet, I may not. Is this going to fly me out the window? My magic carpet is the same. I can fly wherever I want. And when she asked that same question of the youngest brother answered,
Yes.
yes, my magic carpet and my magic pomegranate is no longer whole because you ate of it. And the princess looked at the youngest brother and said, I will marry you because you gave up something of your own. and a lavish wedding was prepared for the youngest brother to marry the princess. The king appointed all three brothers and the princess as advisors to the throne, and they all lived happily ever. Because as we know, the highest Jewish value is to give of ourselves. And there is no one in the world who gives more of himself than our wonderful Rabbi.
So you're really listening to not only a master storyteller, but someone who understood that the real challenge is to make sure and to make possible that there are other master storytellers. And Peninnah is the person in the world today who really has inspired literally thousands of people, not only in America, but throughout the world, to become storytellers and to spread their word. Yes, did you want to say something?
Maybe sometime, if that happens, my mommy.
Tell me a story, right? First of all those words are story words. Sometime, happens, and we have a wonderful brit downstairs. It's a real miracle brit, and I very much want to be with the family. So excuse me for jumping up. I want to tell you my favorite activist story. Activism means to stand up and be there for other people. So this is my favorite story about Jewish activism, but I think it applies to all activism. Again, activism is if you see something bad happening, or if you see someone in need, not to remain silent, to stand up and to do something about it. So here is the story. Once upon a time, there lived a great rabbi. And this rabbi had the capacity to answer any question. Could you imagine? No matter what question you would ask this rabbi would have the answer. Could you imagine? This rabbi is not me, because I hardly have any answers. But this rabbi could answer all the questions. So he went from place to place, or she went from place to place, and came to a city where there were hundreds of people who came together. Now look here, kids, for a second. In the back of the room, there was a little girl. And this little girl, she raised her hand and she said, ooh, I have the question you can't answer. And the rabbi said, well, what kind of question could this little girl ask that I can't answer? And so the rabbi called on her and said, what is your question? And this is what she said. Are you ready? She said, Rabbi, I have in my hand a little butterfly. It's right in my hand. I'll bet you some of you once held a butterfly very softly in your hands. She said, I have this butterfly, and my question is to you, is this butterfly, this little bird, this little butterfly, is it alive or is it dead?
Why?
Now she was very smart. You know why? She thought the following. If the rabbi is going to say that the bird is, or the butterfly is alive, do you know what she'll do? She'll close her hands and she'll kill the little butterfly. Ooh. But if he says that the butterfly is dead, do you know what she'll do? She'll open her hands and the butterfly will fly freely. So, Rabbi, is this butterfly alive or is it dead? And the rabbi, who was very smart, thought to himself, well, what should I say? He was just as smart. He said, if I'm going to say that the butterfly is alive, she'll close her hands. If I'm going to say that it's not, she'll open her hands and the butterfly will fly freely. And he thought to himself, oh my goodness, this is the question. I can't answer. Could you imagine? I travel the whole world, and people who are very smart in this topic or that topic and that subject and this subject ask me the most complicated questions. And this little girl, no more than 5 or 6 years old, raises her hand and she's asking me a question I can't answer.
Why?
And he thought for a moment and thought for a moment, and suddenly, kids, you're not going to believe it, the answer came to him. And he looked out and he said the following. He turned to this little girl and he said, almost crying, and he said, as he was, if you looked at his face looked like he was smiling and he was crying at the same time. Did you ever see it rain when the sun is out? That's what he looked like. Because this answer, he felt that this question was going to inspire an answer that was very important for all of life. So he looked out and he said, you're asking whether this butterfly that you have in your hand is alive or is it dead? I can only tell you one thing. You know what he said? The future of that little bird, the future of that butterfly lies in your hands. Wow. You could let it live, or you could close your hands and it'll be the end. This is a very important lesson. The lesson that it teaches is that all of us have to feel, with the help of God, that when we see something out there, when we see somebody in need, it's in our hands. We can make the whole difference. For our older children, I want to share with you, on my desk, I have a little conversation written out between two people. Person one says to person two, sometimes I feel like asking God, why is there so much poverty in the world? Why is there so much homelessness in the world? Why is there so much sickness in the world? And person two says to person one, well, why don't you ask God that question? And person one says, because I'm afraid that God is going to ask me the same question. So to all the children here, and I'm talking to myself and I'm letting you listen, I want to bless you and ask you to bless me. That one day when we're going to be asked, when you saw that person who needed help in crossing the street, when you were on a bus and you saw an older person walk in, did you help that person across the street? Did you get up and give your seat to that individual? Were you there for your friend when maybe your friend was crying and felt lonely? And for all of us, when the world is in need and there are so many challenges in the world, in Israel and everywhere, let's bless each other. That when we're asked the question, were you there, that we could say, we did our little share to make a difference. So I want you to go home on this Shabbat or whenever you can, or tomorrow or tonight, and I want you to see whether you can repeat this story to your family about the smartest rabbi who was asked the question, is it alive or not? And what did the rabbi say? What did he say? It's up to you. You can make the whole difference. And here's my Peninnah, our Jew. Thank you for coming.
Let's give another hand for Rav Avi, a master storyteller, a beautiful storyteller. So I'm going to tell you one more story, and I hope that you will stay around and talk with me afterwards. Are there any questions that you might have at this moment to ask a storyteller? Anybody? Okay. Yes. I'm going to start a new story. Is that good? A new book. I'm always thinking about what new book and new stories to put together. And speaking of that, that's a beautiful segue. There are a number of books and my CD on the table that you can take a little bit of the way I tell stories and my versions of stories, because these, well, the Apple Tree's Discovery, which I co-authored with one of my first storytelling students at Stern College, Rachel Eckstein Davis, is the story that was first inspired by Rav Avi, and we dedicated the book to him. There's also a free study guide, a 9-page study guide that goes with that book. There's some copies that you can take from the table, or in the form there, you can download it on from the Carbon website. And there's another book, and I'm going to tell you a story from that book, which also has become a PJ Library selection. Any other questions? Yes?
So how did you choose the artist for the Magic Pomegranate?
The publisher chose the artist for all the books.
Oh, okay.
Actually, authors have very little input unless they're extremely well known or the artist is well known. So that's usually a publisher's choice.
But were you happy? I mean, I assume you were happy with their choice, but how did you feel when you saw it?
I'd rather not say about that. You know, we each imagine our own trees, our own apple trees, but people have loved it and it's gotten wonderful reviews, and you can illustrate your own book if you like. Yes. The coolest place I've ever been, this is a pretty cool place, actually. I like this place, yeah. The coolest place is where people are open to listen to stories. And so, thank you. But as I say, I will hang around at the table, and you're welcome to come over and talk with me, and for some autographed books as well. I'm very blessed that 3 of my books, as I say, have been chosen as PJ Library selections, but there are others out there as well. We have trickster tales. We have all kinds of stories and characters and genres of stories in our Jewish oral tradition. And one of them is the trickster. How many of you know what a trickster is? If I say Brer Rabbit, if I say Nesruden Hoja, Anansi the Spider, do you know Anansi the Spider? Yeah. Raven, Jack Tales of Appalachia. Well, we Jews have 2 tricksters. We have Herschel of Ostropol from the Eastern European Ashkenazi tradition. How many of you know about Herschel? Yeah. And in the Arabic tradition, there is a trickster called Joha, and Sephardim have co-opted that Arabic trickster. Any Sephardim here? Not even a token? From what country? From Syria. They may have Joha. Certainly the Turkey, Moroccan, Greek traditions. Do you know who your trickster character is? No. Okay. It may be Joha. This story is in world folklore, and it's probably one of the most popular stories in the world. And you can take any trickster, and if you don't already know a version of this story with other tricksters, they are interchangeable. And so there are versions of this story certainly with Herschel of Ostropol and with Joha. But I'll just tell you the version with Herschel, and you can put in any of your tricksters that you prefer. But Herschel of Ostropol actually lived. He was a real person. He was the jester to Rabbi Baruch of Medzebosh, the grandson of the Baal Shem Tov. And why would a Hasidic master need a jester? You've heard King Lear had a jester. Many kings had jesters. Why would the Rabbi Baruch of Medzebosh need a jester? Well, it seems he suffered from melancholia, and he needed a jester to lift his spirits. So Herschel would tell stories about himself, and he became a legend in his own time. Herschel was a big bear of a man, a long shaggy beard, torn dirty clothes. Whatever he ate, usually you knew from what was on his clothes. And like all tricksters, everywhere, Herschel was poor. And when you are poor, you're also hungry. And Herschel was always looking for a meal, a free meal, that is. He would go to somebody's house, knock on the door, somebody would call out, "Who's there?" "It's me, Herschel." "Nobody's home, come back tomorrow." Nobody wanted to talk with Herschel. Nobody wanted to encounter him on the street because he would always ask for an extra ruble or a meal or a favor. So now you know a little bit about Herschel, right? So Herschel was thinking, where am I going to get a good meal today? It's Friday, Erev Shabbos. Everybody comes home from shul. They have a feast with guests at the table. Tonight, Shabbos, Erev Shabbos, I'm going to have a good meal. So Herschel went to the shul. And after everyone left, he began to walk slowly, thinking, where would he get the best meal on the Shabbos? When suddenly he began to smell the delicious aromas of chicken soup, and roast chicken, and carrot simmus, and potato kugel. And he looked up, and there he saw he was in front of the mansion of the wealthy man of that town by the name of Meyer. And so he saw Meyer was at the open door welcoming in his last guests. And he went up to the porch and he said, "Good Shabbos, Meyer." "Good Shabbos, Herschel." "Oh, Herschel, why did you dawdle and take so much time to arrive? All my guests have already arrived. I don't have a single place at the table for you, and to push you in amongst these balabatim would be a little bit of a shame for them. So, good Shabbos, Herschel." And Meyer closed the door with Meyer inside the house and Herschel outside the house. Now maybe you would have gone home, or maybe I would have gone home, but not Herschel. Herschel went to a friend's house. He borrowed a very handsome suit of clothes, a handsome suit with a silken vest, a satin top hat, and a golden-handled cane, and he returned to the house of that wealthy miser named Meyer, and he went up to the door, tapped gently with that golden-handled cane. Meyer opened the door, seeing this elegantly dressed gentleman. What do you think he did? He invited him in, and he brought him in with great kavod, with great honor. And when Herschel walked inside the house, he noticed that the tables were beautifully set with linen tablecloths, beautiful china, silverware that was gleaming, crystal goblets for the wine, and he also noticed a few empty chairs. They brought Herschel over to one of those chairs, sat down. Everybody had already started eating. They had already eaten the gefilte fish with the Schram. You know what Schram is, right? The horseradish. And they were eating the noodle soup. And the servants were putting down in front of Herschel the gefilte fish with the Schram. They put down the noodle soup. And then they began bringing in the roast chicken and the carrot simmus and the potato kugel and the lokshen kugel, the noodle kugel, and all the rice and the meats and the fruits and the vegetables. And people were eating with hearty appetites, but Herschel waited, smiling. And when all the foods were placed on the table, Herschel picked up the gefilte fish and stuffed it into his pocket, put some Schram on it. He took the meats, the roast chicken. he took the kugels, the potato kugel, and the lokshen kugel, and the carrot simus, and the rice, and the meats, and the potatoes, and all the foods, stuffing his pockets, his inside pockets, his outside pockets, his vest pockets, his pants pockets, his coat pockets, until they were overflowing with food, even putting some food down his sleeves. And then he picked up the noodle soup, the lokshen soup, and he poured it into his pockets. You never saw this? Doesn't happen. And then he picked up the wine and poured it all over himself. And Meyer was up on his feet and said, "What are you doing? Are you crazy? I thought when you came dressed like a gentleman, you would act like a mensch. But I see an ignoramus dressed up as one that remains an ignoramus. Herschel, what are you doing? Are you meshugah chosadea? What are you, crazy?" And Herschel began to laugh, and he said, "It's very simple. For you see, when I first came to this house dressed in my torn, dirty clothes, you closed the door on my face and wished me good Shabbos. But when I returned wearing these elegant clothes of a gentleman, you brought me into the house, greeted me with kavod, put me in a place of honor, and served me all the finest foods and wine with honor. But I am the same person. The only thing that changed were my clothes. And so since my clothes were invited to the feast, why should they not be fed the feast?" And Herschel continued feeding his hungry clothes. And I always used to ask my audiences for a title for that story. Anybody have a good title? Who? What would you call it? The hungry clothes? Yeah, the clothes that came to dinner? Herschel, Ostropolia, and the clothes. Well, someone gave me also that idea of the hungry clothes. And the book, The Hungry Clothes and Other Jewish Folk Tales, is now a book, and it's, of course, the title story of that volume. And I wanted to just tell you one more thing about pomegranates. Even though you may not like pomegranates, they are so beautiful because those petals form a crown that they say King Solomon designed his royal crown like the crown of the pomegranate. But what I love in Song of Songs Rabbah, there is a saying that says, "Children sitting in a row studying Torah are compared to the kernels of a pomegranate." And I fell in love with that vision, that visual picture, and I've loved pomegranates ever since, and I've loved children even before that. But when you look and cut open your pomegranate, take a look and see the 613 kernels of the pomegranate that are like the rows of children studying Torah. And when you cut open your apples, remember the star that sparks a light inside of you. And I wish for all of you to continue telling each other stories. Thank you. So come and sit with me and know.
Can I tell you something?
Sure.
I have the book about with the goblins.
You have the book of Herschel Osterpol with the goblins? Yes, that has become very famous, and people know Herschel because of that book. Do you like the book? Yeah.
And the goblins are different sizes when he's doing different things.
Yes, exactly right. Good.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Nice to meet you.
I'll tell you something.
Oh, please. This one.
No, I don't.
Oh.
Go ahead.
I'm just going to give this to Shuli, all right? And then come over and talk to me.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank
Do you have any acquaintance with Joel and Izzy?
Of course. He has a story in the Mitzvah Stories book.
Yeah, have you seen The Beggar King?
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. When it first came out. Yeah.
And then get the mixing of Weiss that is torn.
You get mitzvah for your house. I think you should get a mitzvah for bringing the tzedakah.
Thank you.
No, he went down to the